This is a short presentation on fire lays or how to commonly build a fire, presented by James Reynolds, District Commissioner with 2nd Fox District, Indian Nations Council, and Scoutmaster for Troop 237 Kellyville. The basics of fire is covered in a different presentation. Most of this is covered under the fire triangle, which is fuel, oxygen, a heat, spark, or chemical reaction. Fire safety rules in Scouts, we follow the firemanship rules. Also, make sure we keep fire safety equipment handy. Buckets of water or sand, a shovel, and in the old days, fire buckets near the tents. Also, we need to take consideration to the size of the fire. One of the best firefighting abilities is to catch it before it ever begins. Only have your fire as big as you need it. As quickly as you can when you get to a campsite, you need to have the Scouts start gathering up firewood. Firewood is considered 3 different types: tinder, kindling, and fuel wood. Tinder sometimes gets a little confused. We try and use an example of a pencil, and people think size of a pencil and smaller. Actually, tinder is considered the size of a pencil lead, so it is much smaller than what some people think it is. You also need to get it about the width of two hands. If you were to take your forefinger and your thumbs, that is the amount of tinder that is needed. Once a fire is started, you should not need to put any more tinder onto the fire. Kindling should be considered about the thickness of your thumb and smaller. You need enough kindling to basically make an armload. Also, you need to worry about fuel wood. Fuel wood is the heart and soul of your campfire. You need to think about it as being roughly the thickness of your wrist, and really you don't need a huge amount of that is bigger than your wrist. Think about it as the thickness of your wrist and smaller. Also, try and keep the logs to where it's your length from your foot to your knee and shorter. To begin with, we need tinder or some form of fire starter. This is going to be the first thing to light on fire, and you use your tinder to catch the kindling on fire. Once the fire is going, you will never need to put any more tinder on unless the fire goes out. So once you get the fire going, there is no need to put any more grass, leaves, or anything like that. You want to try and think dry and fluffy. Examples of this are dry grass, bark pieces, pine needles, dryer lint, wood shavings, and even char cloth. If you see the picture in the diagram, this is what's called a bird's nest. No, somebody did not just climb up into a tree, find a bird's nest, and bring it down. That's actually a little toxic and not a good example. This is something that somebody has built, and it's called a bird's nest, and it's because it resembles one. They use grass. They use, one of my favorite is taking the sisal rope and taking a knife and kind of fuzzing it out, but they would wind up making something like this, just kind of a bowl-shaped pattern that is easily lit off. The tinder should immediately catch on fire and spread easily to the rest of the tinder. It produces enough heat to catch the kindling on fire. If you put too much, too big, and too fast, that is the perfect recipe for a smothered fire. For starting out, pine and other softwoods are the best. They burn hot and fast and produce a lot of heat. Kindling, think of it as the thickness of your finger or thumb and smaller. Good kindling should also be able to snap easily in one hand. Examples: splinters of wood, small twigs and branches, and fuzz sticks. If you could find any deadfall that is still in trees hovering above the ground, that is usually some of the best kindling. Fuel wood does not necessarily need to be huge logs. Fuel wood can be bigger than your finger, but it rarely needs to be bigger than your wrist. You need to keep in consideration the size of the fire and what you're wanting to do. What is your purpose? Warmth? Duration? Signaling? Cooking? Are you trying to produce a fire for a campfire ceremony? Also, you can have a fire just because. Keeping a fire going also helps with morale, especially if you are lost or in a survival situation. Also, it is good practice to learn what kinds of wood there are in the area you're camping. Softwood will produce a lot of heat very fast, but it also cools down very fast. Pine is the best. Cedar is also okay, but it will pop and snap. Softwoods also are known for leaving a lot of soot and residue. Hardwood is something that's going to be there for a while. Oak and maple are the best examples, and they will leave coals that are some of the best for cooking. The coals can also be used to help rekindle the fire the next morning. So, which of these two do you need? Actually, both. Softwood will help get the fire going. The hardwood will help keep it going a long time. Before you start building your fire, make sure your location is ready. Also, make sure your safety equipment is ready and in position. Make sure you have at the very least 2 times the wood that you think you need ready and in a proper location. If you try and build your fire with minimal wood, your fire will go out while looking for more. Also, it's helpful to go out a little further to find firewood to begin with, and that way there's a little bit closer firewood to your campsite. Always find one person in charge of the fire. That way there's not multiple people arguing over the job duties. Also, I found that scouts like to have a position or a title. So come up with something like Lord of the Flame or the Fire Master, possibly the Firebug or even the Fire Marshal.
From now on, you'll have to refer to me as Sid, Lord of the Flame.
Hey, Lord of the Flame. Your tail's on fire.
One of the first fire lays is the teepee method. This is kind of the go-to per scouts per the manual. You put your tinder in the middle, and then you start putting your kindling on the outside. Basically, you are going to make a teepee of it. Start with 3 sticks and just start adding a little bit of kindling all the way around. Fuel wood, if you're going to use it, needs to be on kind of the outside to where once the kindling is going, you can kind of push the fuel wood in towards the center to allow that to get going as well. I am going to kind of give a personal opinion. I personally do not like the TP method. This is a very good method and the go-to for scouts. This is very well documented inside the manual itself. Once you know the procedure of how tinder catches kindling, catches the fuel, you can find other methods than just the TP to get started. The TP I find is a little bit of time consuming. Also, it's usually a big balancing technique. It's easy to knock over. But the reason that they use this as a teaching method is because it helps show the principles, and also it is something that can be repeatable by people who are just starting to learn the procedure. Another method is called the log cabin, and I find this to be a fairly successful one. Basically, the log cabin starts out by putting the tinder down on the ground. You can also put this on like a piece of bark or something to kind of help keep it oscillated off the ground if the ground has a lot of moisture. From there, you take your kindling and you start putting it on the outside in a crisscross pattern similar to what you would see a log cabin built. As you get a little bit higher, you want to move these walls inward to where it forms more of a pyramid. But putting it over there, crisscrossing it, and then you actually want to take bigger fuel wood and start building a log cabin on the outside of this. What happens is just similar to the other fire lays. You light off the tinder, it will catch the kindling will then catch the fuel wood. The lean-to fire lay is one that I actually really like, and you will see me use this quite often. You'll take a big piece of fuel wood and you would stab one end of it into the dirt. You would then lean it forward and I will typically use a fairly good size piece of wood that has a fork in it and lean this piece of fuel wood into the fork itself. Underneath that fork, I would start putting the tinder. I will take pieces of kindling of various sizes and be able to lean it up against on the outside of this. This is a very good one because depending upon the size of kindling you have, you can put your longer pieces out further out towards the middle, and you can put your smaller pieces up towards the point where it reaches the ground. It seems like there is a good place to put different sizes of kindling. If you have something that's too short that doesn't fit in there, you can usually consider it so small that you could put it as part of your tinder underneath. There are two versions of the hunter fire, but both work equally well. One method is by laying two fuel logs parallel to one another and start placing a little bit of tinder in there and then the kindling across the top. The other method is by using a V formation. Basically, the two pieces of fuel wood would actually meet in a V, and you would start putting the tinder underneath in the very tight corner and then the kindling up on top above it. This hunter fire is a very good one to basically provide a support to put a pot or a pan, and this is a very quick one and something that you're planning on basically using and extinguishing fairly quickly. The reflector fire lay is something that traditionally has been in a scout manual, and it is very interesting and works well in theory, but it does take a lot of time and effort, and it does have some problems. In theory, it would basically reflect the heat back onto a tent or a person sitting in front of it, and the wood would automatically feed itself into the fire. I personally have tried doing this, and I have not had any luck or success trying to keep the higher up log catching on fire versus the lower logs. There are other methods that seem to do a little bit better. Now, one thing that I do see, and I have actually used, and it's been very well, is a reflector wall. The wall you can see in the picture a little bit down below, and basically it allows the same thing as it would reflect the heat, but it doesn't just automatically feed the wood into the fire. You still have to do that manually. The Starfire lay is another one that you see commonly in most Boy Scout manuals and bushcraft manuals, but in theory you can do this in different pattern other than star. What it is you basically take your fuel wood and they all meet at a common point. At this point is where you'll lay your tinder and your kindling and get the fire going. Later as the evening goes on, if you need additional heat, basically you would take the fuel logs and move them in closer to the fire. Again, you don't necessarily have to have it all spread out. You could also do this in a very similar fashion with trees in one typical direction and just slowly move them in as you need it. This is also a very good one if for some reason you do not have to have a saw to where you can trim your wood down to a proper size. Again, all of these methods that have been presented should be considered training methods and not end all be all, this is the perfect method of building a fire. When you get out there, you need to learn what works for you. Something that works for you may not work best for the person next to you, and that person may have a totally different thing that works for them that you cannot get started at all. Again, you need to consider the purpose. If you're looking for warmth, a reflector fire might be the best. If you're looking for something for cooking or just to build it real quick and then put it out, a hunter fire might be the best. Signaling, you need a fire very fast, very quick. A teepee or a lean-to might be the best. Or a campfire ceremony, you might want to build a very large log cabin type fire. This concludes our presentation. Again, this is the Scoutmaster saying thank you.